We are now only 5 days away from the meeting in Alaska between Russian President Vladimir Putin and U.S. President Donald Trump. The whole point is to try and bring this long and bloody war to an end. But what we have now in these last days, really, this whole thing started just a few days ago when Trump announced this meeting between Russia and the United States, set off a flurry of activity all over Europe and, of course, in Ukraine. And now that you have what's we're starting to see now, there's basically four various parties that are involved in this, and each is trying to exert its views and to try and get something good out of this. You have, of course, the Russians, you have the Americans, you have the Ukrainians, and you have the Europeans. And in some places they overlap, and in some places they contradict. And in fact, we'll see that the more contradictions are on the three Western side than they are on the Russian side. And all of this is going to come down to a big head on Friday when President Trump meets Vladimir Putin on American territory. Now, let's back up a little bit to Friday to kind of see where the sides are, because since Trump made his comments on Friday, there's been additional comments by Zelensky. There's been additional comments by the Europeans. There hasn't been anything new from Russia so far, at least nothing that's been publicly announced. But his positions are really pretty standard and static, and they have probably not changed. And that's going to factor into this as well. Let's take a look, first of all. This is what President Trump said he wanted to accomplish and why he's thinking that this war can be brought to an end. And in these meetings, he's expecting some land to be swapped.
Will Zelensky have to give up territory, Mr. President?
Well, you're looking at territory that's been fought over for 3.5 years with, a lot of Russians have died, a lot of Ukrainians have died. So we're looking at that, but we're actually looking to get some back and some swapping. It's complicated. It's actually nothing easy. It's very complicated, but we're going to get some back. We're going to get some switched. There'll be some swapping of territories to the betterment of both.
Yeah, to the betterment of both. I mean, I hear you. That's ideally what you would like in any kind of negotiations. But when you're talking about the bad blood between the two sides and the number of people that have been killed on each side of that line, there's not going to be anything that either side is going to come out and agree this is to our betterment. When you have a situation on the ground that favors one side over the other, you've got to have some pretty big incentives for the side with the power dynamics on its favor to be able to agree to something that would come out to the benefit of the side on the weaker side of this. This is just common sense in war. It's been that way for millennium throughout human history, really. And for Trump to say, hey, we want to have some land swapping, of course, the first question is, what is he talking about? And there's been a lot of speculation on that because it's pointed out correctly by many that there's virtually no Russian territory that Ukraine has possession of. So we certainly isn't talking about this tiny little sliver of a village in the Sumy or north of the Sumy area inside of Russia. So they're definitely not talking about that. The only thing that makes any sense at all is that he's talking about where the Russians have a foothold in the Sumy region and in two different spots of the Kharkiv region and possibly even part of the Dnipropetrovsk region in the east. It could be that Russia is saying, or that Trump rather is thinking, hey, we'll swap that. Russia will withdraw from that. In exchange, Ukraine will withdraw from the Donbas, et cetera, through the administrative borders here. That may happen because it could be that Russia says that we don't really want the territory in Sumy and Kharkiv because they're pretty small. They're not that big, doesn't provide any particular utility to Russia. So I can imagine they would pretty easily, quote, swap that. So if that's what Trump's thinking about, then probably that is something that Putin would be willing to do. But then we get to the hard issues, and that, of course, is the four oblasts into the right, into the east of the country. And that is where the problem comes in, because Putin has said since June of 2024, he wants Ukraine to withdraw from all of that down to the administrative borders, which include still significant portions of the southern three provinces that Ukraine still has possession of. Well, let's take a look now at what Trump also said about how he wants peace and what he's expecting Zelensky to do.
President Putin, I believe, wants to see peace, and Zelensky wants to see peace. Now, President Zelensky has to get all of his everything he needs, because he's going to have to get ready to sign something, and I think he is working hard to get that done.
Yeah, see, now then you're really getting into the rub because President Trump is laying in the expectation that there's going to be some territory swapped, and Zelensky's going to have to note his words there. Zelensky's going to have to sign something. So President Trump is expecting Zelensky to do what Zelensky has said he doesn't want to do, and what Zelensky has been fighting for 3.5 years not to do, and that is to validate the actual loss of the territory, whatever it turns out to be the case here, whether it's what Putin wants or Trump's trying to get some middle ground or something, because there's apparently some idea that maybe Trump is trying to get Putin to agree to only where the line of contact is in Zaporizhia and Kherson Oblast in the south. That probably won't fly. But in any case, that may be what he's thinking. Well, Zelensky's not having any of that. In fact, what Zelensky said subsequent to the soundbite we showed you yesterday, he's even more emphatically against this now.
Потрібна не пауза у вбивствах, а реальний тривалий мир. Не припинення вогню колись там, потім, через місяці, а негайно. Президент Трамп мені так говорив, і я це абсолютно підтримав. Йому дали взяти Крим, і це призвело до окупації в Донецькій та Луганській областях. Він не отримав превентивного покарання, коли зібрав контингент на наших кордонах. Це призвело до повномасштабної війни та окупації ще частин України. Зараз Путін хоче, щоб йому пробачили захоплення півдня нашої Херсонщини, Запоріжжя, повної території Луганщини, Донеччини, Криму. Цю другу спробу поділу України Росії ми не дамо.
So you see, he directly contradicts Trump on two major issues there. The first one is that he says this, I don't want just some kind of ceasefire later on. I want an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. That's what he's been asking for a long time, because that's what Ukraine desperately needs, both in the air, the sea, and on the ground. That's what they want. They want an unconditional, just let's stop the fighting and then let's talk. Trump's not even talking about that. He hasn't even mentioned anything about an unconditional ceasefire. Now, he had been said, to be fair, he had set a deadline on Friday that if Putin had not agreed to an unconditional ceasefire by then, he was going to level sanctions and tariffs. Well, that went by the wayside, just like every other deadline that Trump has set. Recall, bears repeating, he's going to get it signed and the war over with in 24 hours. Then it was going to be 100 days. Then it was going to be a few days. And then it was going to be 50 days. And then it was going to be 10 days. And that every one of those deadlines come and gone and nothing happens. And that's the case again this time as well. And now Trump's not even talking about ceasefire anymore. Now he's only talking primarily about swapping of land. And then that's the second thing, because Ukraine and Zelensky there directly in front of everybody's face says, we're not swapping anything. It was illegally seized from us. The territory was taken, and we're not going to reward Putin for taking and give him whatever he wants in the south, in Zaporizhia and Kherson. So that leaves us at a pretty big contradiction. He doesn't appear to be falling in line, even though you saw at the beginning that he tries to say, I appreciate President Trump trying to work to end the war out. So he's trying to placate him. But then when it comes to the substance, he's directly contradicting him, saying he's not going to do that. So, I mean, just on the first basis there, you got to say, all right, well, when Trump goes into Alaska with Putin, he already knows that Zelensky is categorically saying, I'm not going to sign any of this stuff. So what we have to realize here, what Zelensky has to realize here, and what the Europeans, as we're going to get to in a minute, have to realize is that there is what the reality is on the ground. You can have your preferences, you can have your strong feelings, you can have your view that you're in the moral right, and maybe you are, but at the bottom line, none of that stuff matters, folks. The only thing that matters is what you can do and what you can't do. And it matters about the balance of power. And right now, the reality, the stark, firm reality on the ground is that Russia is in possession of all those territories, to include the footholds in Sumy and Kharkiv and now Dnipropetrovsk. Those are the realities. Doesn't matter if you like it or not. Doesn't matter if it's immoral or not by your perception. Zero concerns. The only thing that matters is what is real on the ground. And that's what has to be dealt with. And that's what is not being dealt with, at least in Brussels and in Kiev. They're still locked in what they want to be true. And listen, you could really, really want something bad, but if you cannot compel the other side to abandon its positions, and they keep saying, well, it's sanctions. We just need more sanctions. The next sanction is always the one. The next sanction will do it. It never has, and it's not going to. Because Russia, because of all these other sanctions, has made itself almost impervious to Western sanctions, because they have created a situation and an economic system that now no longer relies on the West, and there's minimal inflection points you can bring. There are some, but there are annoyances around the edges because Russia has made themselves where they are no longer susceptible to that. So that's off the table, but we don't accept it. We continue to say, no, I think that we can do that. That's one thing we got to do. Zelensky has continued to say that even the last couple of days. It isn't true, but it's in the fantasy in his mind that he believes it in. And definitely on the ground militarily, you don't have the capacity. All of the support from the West and all the Ukraine forces, they've been trying for 3.5 years, and they have failed for 3.5 years, and especially the last two. Ever since the end of its failed offensive operation in 2023, it has been nothing but slow, bleeding losses ever since then. And they don't have the capacity remaining in their country, if they mobilize everything, to throw the Russians back. Because the Russians, if you did that, they could mobilize 5 times more. So no matter what happens, you're never going to have the manpower, regardless of the supplies, the money, or anything else, to force Russia back. Therefore, that should lead to any rational understanding that we need to get the best deal we can get right now in Alaska while we still have a chance for negotiations. Because absent negotiations, the only thing that will be left to the Russian side is a conquest. It's just a war of conquest, even if it takes another 2 or 3 years. U.S. intelligence, European intelligence has confirmed or has assessed that Russia could continue to fight not through the next year, but through 2027 at current rates, and continue to expand and to not have any problems. Ukraine might not be able to make it through this year. So everywhere you want to look, the rational position, no matter how much you hold to desires and preferences, says that this is not going to end well for the Ukraine if they don't take this opportunity here. And doesn't look like they're going to. And the European Union is giving Ukraine even more reason to go against Trump when they issued a statement just yesterday, which ironically came after many of them were meeting with Vice President J.D. Vance. Apparently, he was not able to convince them to do anything different. And so they, again, just like Zelensky, they're trying to placate Trump and trying to sound like they're on his team. This is the statement that was released yesterday by Macron, Prime Minister Meloni, Chancellor Merz, Prime Minister Tusk, Prime Minister Starmer, President von der Leyen, European Union President von der Leyen, and President Stubb from Poland, I think. No, not Poland. That's, President Stubb. This is where they all stand on the meeting coming up there. Of course, they start off that we welcome President Trump's work to stop the killing in Ukraine, blah, 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 but then we get to the heart of the matter. We agree that these vital interests, they're talking about the European and Ukraine vital interests, include the need for robust and credible security guarantees that enable Ukraine to effectively defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity. Ukraine has the freedom of choice over its destiny. Meaningful negotiations can only take place in the context of a ceasefire or reduction of hostilities. The path to peace in Ukraine cannot be decided without Ukraine. We remain committed to the principle that international borders must not be changed by force. The current line of context should be the starting point for negotiations. We reiterate that Russia's unprovoked and illegal invasion of Ukraine is a flagrant violation of the UN Charter, the Helsinki Final Act, the Budapest Memorandum, and successive Russian commitments. We underline our unwavering commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. So literally everything that Trump is trying to get done, they are categorically opposed. Everything that they talked about in that very long list are things that they would like to see happen, but they don't have the wherewithal to make it happen. There is no path that Ukraine and the Europe and the West at large can compel Russia to adopt any of those situations, any of those declarations there. And just look at it. I mean, the first one is the biggest no-go of all. They say they want security guarantees, which in subsequent conversations also from Europe over the weekend that included J.D. Vance, they said they still want an open door for NATO. That is by itself, if nothing else was on the paper, is rejected by the Russians as being the reason why we went to war in the first place, and we're not going to back off of that. So I don't know why anyone at this point would even be talking about NATO. And why would NATO want Ukraine inside of its alliance when it would be putting them into conflict with Russia? Within you get an Article 5 possibility of nuclear war. It's insane. It is irrational. It is just off the table, crazy, and yet that's just where we are. They continue to hit several times on the territorial integrity, meaning they don't want to swap anything. So again, they're in direct contradiction with President Trump. We're not going to swap anything. We want everything back. And this harkens back to the 1991 borders. Now, they said in that statement that the negotiations will start at the current line of contact. And then, of course, in their mind, because of territorial integrity, we'll go back to what they were prior to the war starting. And it's never going to happen, and there's no way that they can compel that to happen. And then this weird part here, that Ukraine has freedom of choice. No, they don't. They don't have freedom of choice. It's a fantasy. They are, first of all, tremendously dependent upon Europe itself. They can do nothing. They can't even exist without the help from Europe and the United States. So they're not a free actor here at all. And they also certainly, even less, have any freedom of ability and freedom of choice in terms of the war in Russia. They are constrained and they are compelled to defensive positions by the stronger Russian side. So one has to wonder, where is this going? We're now 5 days away from this meeting, and you have the four sides in a complete opposite. You have Trump, who wants to swap land and end the war. You have Zelensky, who wants a 30-day ceasefire and give up no land. You have the European Union that wants to give up no land and get NATO involved back into the conversation again. And then, of course, you have Russia, which wants back to its June 2024 line, the 4 oblasts plus demilitarization and denazification. That hasn't even been talked about here. Obviously, no one in the West is even going to contemplate those. But that, unless there's a radical shift on the Russian side, those are still requirements for the Russians. And as we've been showing you here just yesterday, there's a lot of Russians, and I've had some other conversations subsequent to that. There's a lot of angry Russians, and even the contemplation that Putin would consider giving in on any of these points, because they see on the ground that they have the balance of powers in their favor, and that they can continue to roll, whether fast or slow, until they get everything that they feel that they need for their security on their terms. And if Putin gives it away when they have the capacity to compel those, then that would, as we showed a reporter yesterday who covers extensively events in the Donbas, that would cause a revolt in Russia against Putin. So I doubt very seriously that he's going to risk domestic tranquility and security to try and make Trump happy, or do something to make Zelensky or the European Union happy, which is impossible in any case. So I think what we're going to have a situation here is that the question really that I want to answer is why would both Putin and Trump agree to this meeting in light of these big contradictions? Because it's not a casual thing that they agreed to meet face to face. That's always a big deal. And it certainly is going to be here. So we have to see what's expected to come out. What I suspect is the case, let's look first of all at Trump, is that I think he really believes that his force of personality is going to be able to get Putin to do something that's against his own national interest, but will make some other people happy. And Trump will probably think, okay, well, I'll spice it up and I'll give him some other steps. Look, maybe we'll go back to, get this START treaty. Maybe we'll go back to the INF treaty. Perhaps we'll roll that back and go back into compliance with that. But we'll be talking about long-term relations and improving relations between Russia and the United States, maybe offering some reduction of sanctions. I mean, he may be thinking he's going to do a lot of those kinds of things, but that Russia will then give in on issues to their core security interests. And I think that's where he's going to be sorely mistaken, because I think Russia does want the improvement in some of those other areas. They do want better long-term relations, but only after they have assured their national security interest on their borders. That appears to be a no-pin line. No penetration line. It's a military term. It means that they can't give up on that. So I doubt seriously they'll do that. But that seems to be what Trump is counting on here, because he's taken a big gamble. If he meets, especially on American soil, and gets nothing, he comes off looking weak. And especially if he can't get Europe to change from any of its positions, or he can't get Zelensky to sign off on anything he may agree to with Putin, then it looks like that Trump can't bring anybody to anything, not even our own side, and he comes off looking weaker. And at that point, he's left with the dilemma of, do I just keep playing a weak hand, or Does he extract himself and say, all right, you guys got this? You know, if you've been watching our channel for any amount of time, that's what I've been advocating from the very beginning. I thought he should have done that immediately and would have avoided so many of these problems, and it could have come off looking strong and like a decisive leader, as opposed to somebody who now can't bring anybody else along his side and just walks away because he's frustrated. But that's still the least bad option at this point for Trump. We'll see how it works out. Now, what is it for Vladimir Putin? Now, he can come out winning really no matter how this happens. If he goes into these negotiations and gets all the 4 territories that he's asking for and gets compliance, and somehow Trump is then able to turn around and compel compliance among Europe and Ukraine, then Putin can come out winning, because now he's got his big issues solved, and then now he can work on long-term relations and improving, et cetera, at the strategic and diplomatic levels. If he gets nothing, if Trump agrees to anything, they come to any kind of an agreement, and then Trump can't deliver, then Putin has the ability to walk on the international stage, and especially to the global south and to Asia, and say, folks, we tried. We did everything in our power to try to bring this war to a conclusion. The other side just wouldn't have it. They wouldn't negotiate on the smallest of issues. The only thing left to us now is to complete the special military operation, or potentially turn it into, even by their terms, of war. Maybe they would mobilize and, clean sweep across. Who knows? But Putin then can be seen in the global south and in the Asia, where they still have a lot of influence, as being a reasonable guy who tried to bring peace. It continued to have all these opportunities going back to Istanbul in 2022, all the way through to last June. And then now this whole long process here over the last several months, where he's been trying to have a negotiated solution, where they've been offering that. Won't wash any of it in the Western Europe or the United States. None of that. All those logic and arguments will fall flat, of course, but that's not who he's talking to. He's talking to the rest of the world, because just like we've made him sanctions proof because of all these sanctions that we brought in, he's limiting his exposure to the Western world. He's now expanding his exposure and business opportunities and diplomatic opportunities in the rest of the world. And there he has a chance to have some success. So don't get the idea that Putin's trying to sway anybody in Europe or the United States, because he's not. I think he knows that's a losing proposition. He'd probably like to have it, but is unconcerned if he doesn't have it. Instead, he's focusing where he can actually make some benefit to his country. So I think the reason that he took this is because he can win almost any way it goes. We'll have to wait and see. And I'm sure that there's going to be lots of things happening in between now and then, these next 5 days, fraught with peril. I can certainly see a lot of motivation in many in the West to want to create some kind of crisis, some kind of big event that happens. Maybe Ukraine strikes something and Russia strikes back real hard. And then they say, okay, now we're not even going to meet on August 15th, because believe me, Ukraine and Europe desperately want this meeting canceled. They do not want Trump meeting with Vladimir Putin in Alaska. And they continue to repeat nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. They're trying to say that over and over. And Trump so far said, no, not doing it. Maybe later on, if we get some kind of agreement here, then we'll have a triple entente kind of a situation, a meeting with the 3 heads of state. Then we can sign, and have a big ceremony or something. But Zelensky wants to be there now. In fact, they're trying to get some people, some Ukrainian representatives, at least in Alaska, some high ranking, at least there, if not in the meeting itself. But they may get that, but they're not going to get a head of state. And so whatever's decided in that room, it's going to be between Trump and Putin, and it's not going to include anybody in Europe. It's not going to include anybody from Ukraine. And that's just the way of it. So watch for any kind of provocations that they may do to try to undo this and try to sabotage this before it even gets started. So the next few days could include a lot of anxiety, or will include a lot of anxiety, could include a lot of action on the battlefield too. So be watching for that space. And we at Daniel Davis Deep Dive will continue to bring all this to you as it happens, and any kind of analysis or any breaking news that happens, you can count on us bringing it to you then. Thank you very much, and we'll see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.